I was standing on my front porch, holding a piece of heavy-stock, cream-colored paper that felt way too expensive to be a threat. But it was. A $500 citation. For visual blight. The crime scene? My welcome mat. The weapon? A single pair of size 11, perfectly broken in, slightly muddy brown Timberland boots. Now, let me paint a picture for you. I live in Naperville, Illinois. It is a place where the lawns are so green they look radioactive, and the neighborhood watch treats a slightly crooked mailbox like an act of domestic terrorism. I moved here because it's quiet. I didn't realize that the price of quiet was submitting to a shadow government run by people who treat Pinterest boards as binding legal documents. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had just gotten back from a weekend hiking trip at Starved Rock, absolutely exhausted, and I'd kicked my boots off on the porch so I wouldn't track Illinois clay all over my hardwood floors. That's it. That's the entire inciting incident. Normal human behavior, right? Wrong. Not in the Whispering Pines premium estates. I heard the rhythmic, sharp click-clack of sensible heels marching up my driveway. I didn't even have to look up. It was Brenda. Brenda was the Homeowners Association President. She possessed a terrifying, vibrating energy, a haircut that practically demanded to speak to the regional manager, and a voice like a lawnmower choking on a rock. "David!" she barked, stopping exactly on the property line as if my driveway was lava. "Are you flagrantly ignoring the warning, or are you just incapable of reading?" I looked at the $500 piece of paper. Then I looked at the boots. "Brenda, it's mud. It rained. That's literally how nature works. I'm going to hose them off in 20 minutes. "This is a premium community, David, not a swamp." She gestured wildly at the boots as if they were a biohazard. "Hideous footwear degrades our property values. We have prospective buyers touring the cul-de-sac tomorrow. What will they think when they see this refuse rotting on your stoop?" "They'll think a guy went outside?" I shot back, rubbing my temples. "Look, Brenda, I'm not paying $500 because my boots are outside for an afternoon." "Bylaw 4A, Section 3, David!" she shrieked, her face turning an impressive shade of magenta. "No unsanctioned outdoor storage or visual obstructions. You have exactly 1 hour to rectify this blight, or the fine doubles." She spun on her heels and marched away. Fine, I thought. I'll play the game. I didn't take them inside. I'm not a pushover. But I did move them. I picked up the muddy Timberlands and tucked them neatly around the side of the porch, behind a large potted fern. Out of sight from the street. Visual blight solved, right? Wrong again. I woke up the next morning, coffee in hand, stepped out onto the porch to check the mail, and froze. The fern was slightly pushed aside. The boots were gone. Stolen. Vanished into the manicured Naperville ether. And taped to my front door was a smug, passive-aggressive little sticky note written in purple gel pen. "Neighborhood cleanup successful. Keep our community beautiful. The HOA board." She threw away my boots. My perfectly worn-in, waterproof $200 boots. Game on. I walked straight back inside, slammed my coffee mug onto the counter, and grabbed my phone. I didn't call Brenda. I called the Naperville Non-Emergency Police Dispatch. If she wanted to play by the rules, we were going to play by the rules. 30 minutes later, a cruiser rolled up. Enter Officer Martinez. Martinez stepped out of the car looking like a guy who was running on 3 hours of sleep, 2 bad cups of gas station coffee, and a deep, profound regret for choosing a career in suburban law enforcement. He adjusted his duty belt, sighed deeply at my house, and ambled up the driveway. "All right, sir. Martinez said, pulling out a little notepad that had clearly seen better days. Dispatch said something about a grand larceny? Theft of private property, officer, I corrected, crossing my arms. And I know exactly who did it. Okay. He clicked his pen. What was taken? My Timberlands, size 11, brown leather, stolen right from behind that fern. Martinez stopped writing. He looked at the fern. He looked at me. He looked back at the fern. Your shoes. My boots! They were perfectly broken in. It takes years to get the arches right, Martinez. He let out a breath that was 50% exhaustion and 50% pure annoyance. Do you have security footage? No, but I have a confession. I ripped the purple sticky note off my door and shoved it into his hands. Read it. Brenda, the HOA president, took them. She complained about them yesterday. I moved them, and today they're gone, replaced with this confession of guilt. Martinez squinted at the purple gel pen. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. Let me get this straight, man. You want me to roll up to a 60-year-old woman's house and arrest her for throwing away a pair of dirty boots? Yes, that is exactly what I want you to do. That's theft. Look, man, Martinez said, handing the sticky note back. She says they were abandoned trash left out in the open. You say it's your property. I say this is a civil matter. It's an HOA dispute. I can't arrest a lady over a neighborhood spat about porch aesthetics. Take it up with the board. The board is Brenda, I practically yelled, gesturing wildly at the empty spot where my boots used to be. She acts like she's the Supreme Court of Naperville. Martinez gave me a look of genuine pity. Then you better find a good lawyer or learn to keep your shoes inside. Have a good one, sir. He walked back to his cruiser, leaving me standing on my porch with nothing but a purple sticky note and a burning white-hot desire for vengeance. The police wouldn't help. The HOA board was rigged. Brenda held all the cards. If I fought her on her terms, if I went to her little meetings, if I argued about Bylaw 4A, I would lose. She had nothing but free time and an endless supply of purple pens. I needed a weapon she didn't understand. I needed to go over her head, way, way over her head. I went back inside and locked the door. I literally just stood in my foyer for a good 10 minutes, staring at the empty space where my boots used to be, letting the sheer, unfiltered audacity of Brenda wash over me. I mean, she stole my shoes and then bragged about it on stationery. That is supervillain behavior, but it's the kind of mundane, HOA-approved supervillain behavior that you can't just punch in the face. You have to outsmart it. You have to, legally destroy it. I walked into my kitchen, opened the fridge, and pulled out 3 cans of zero-sugar Monster Energy. I cracked the first one, took a long pull that tasted like aggressive battery acid and spite, and sat down at my laptop. If Brenda wanted to use Bylaw 4A, Section 3, to justify grand larceny, then I was going to read every single word of that miserable, soul-crushing document. Honestly, reading an HOA covenant is like reading the terms and conditions for a software update, except if you violate them, a woman with a terrible bob haircut can literally put a lien on your house. I spent the next 6 hours diving into the Whispering Pines Premium Estates Master Declaration. It was horrifying. I mean, did you know that in my neighborhood, your mailbox flag must be painted a specific shade of cranberry matte, approved by the board in 2014? Or that you are only allowed to have a maximum of 2 wind chimes and they cannot exceed 32 inches in length? I'm not even making this up. The level of micromanagement was genuinely psychotic. But I wasn't looking for wind chime laws. I was looking for a shield. Something, anything, that superseded Brenda's absolute authority over the exterior of my property. Around 2 a.m., my vision started to blur. I was on my second energy drink, and the words on the screen were just turning into alphabet soup. Local zoning ordinances were a bust. Naperville Municipal Code basically backed up the HOA's right to enforce their own aesthetic standards. I was, for all intents and purposes, completely screwed on a local level. The city gave the HOA the power to govern itself, which meant Brenda was judge, jury, and executioner of my front porch. "There has to be a loophole," I muttered to my empty kitchen, furiously scrolling through a legal forum. "There's always a loophole." I started searching broader terms. Federal laws superseding HOA. HOA versus federal government. How to legally destroy an HOA president. Most of the results were about the FCC's OTARD rule. You know, the one that says an HOA can't stop you from putting up a satellite dish. But I didn't want a satellite dish. A satellite dish wouldn't piss Brenda off enough. A satellite dish is just a piece of metal. I wanted something that would viscerally offend her on a spiritual level. She hated my boots because they were visual blight. She hated ugly things. So, how do I legally force her to look at something spectacularly, aggressively ugly? By 4 a.m., I was deep down a rabbit hole of property rights and First Amendment protections when I stumbled across a Wikipedia article about a weird legal dispute from the 1990s in New York. A group of artists had basically welded a massive, insane-looking sculpture into the lobby of a commercial building, and when the new building owners tried to tear it down, the artists sued them and actually won. Wait, what? I sat up straight, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. I clicked the link to the federal statute mentioned in the case. Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106A, the Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990. VARA. I started reading, and honestly, it felt like the heavens had literally parted and handed me a glowing golden sword of petty revenge. Here is the breakdown. Plain and simple. VARA is a federal copyright law that grants specific moral rights to artists. Basically, if an artist creates a work of recognized stature that is incorporated into a building, like physically attached to it, the owner of that building, or anyone else for that matter, cannot destroy, modify, or remove that artwork without the explicit permission of the artist. If they do, it's a federal copyright violation. And federal law absolutely, 100%, trumps Brenda's little HOA bylaws. I read the text of the law 3 times just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating from the caffeine. The author of a work of visual art shall have the right to prevent any destruction of a work of recognized stature, and any intentional or grossly negligent destruction of that work is a violation of that right. If Brenda tried to forcefully remove a federally protected piece of art, she wouldn't be violating an HOA rule. She would be committing a federal offense carrying statutory damages of up to $150,000 per infringement. A slow, manic smile spread across my face. She thought a single pair of brown leather hiking boots was visual blight? She thought they were a hideous degradation of her precious property values? I was going to give her visual blight. I was going to give her a monument to visual blight. I just needed to find the ugliest, most offensive, most visually loud objects on the planet and permanently attach them to the siding of my house as a contemporary art installation. My mind immediately went to garden gnomes. No, too cliché. Flamingos? Overdone. Then I remembered a trip to a mall a few years back, a wall of neon, perforated foam, the ultimate symbol of function over form, the shoe that society loves to hate, but secretly wears to take out the garbage. Crocs. Not just any Crocs. Neon pink, safety orange, slime green. I was going to buy 50 pairs of the most aggressively colored Crocs ever manufactured and nail them directly into the vinyl siding of my Naperville home. But there was a catch. There's always a catch. I couldn't just do it myself. VARA only protects works of recognized stature created by a recognized artist. If I just stapled some shoes to my house, a judge would laugh me out of court, and Brenda would probably fine me $1,000. I needed a mercenary. I needed a hired gun who happened to hold a fine arts degree. I finally went to sleep as the sun was coming up, my brain buzzing with the logistics of federal art law and bulk shoe purchases. I woke up at 2 p.m., feeling like I had been hit by a truck, but my resolve was absolute. I grabbed my laptop and hit the local Naperville community boards, Craigslist, and local gallery websites. I needed a specific type of person. I needed a contractor who could safely attach items to a house without destroying the structural integrity, but who also had a legitimate, documented exhibition history in the fine arts. It was a wildly specific Venn diagram, but I lived in the suburbs of Chicago. There had to be someone. After 3 hours of sifting through pretentious portfolios of people who painted fruit, I found him. Michael Mad Dog Mike Evans. His business website was called Evans Custom Decks and Pergolas, and it was filled with pictures of very sturdy, very normal-looking cedar patios. But down at the bottom, in the About the Owner section, there was a tiny hyperlink that said Personal Works. I clicked it. It redirected to a sleek, minimalist gallery portfolio. Michael Evans had a Master of Fine Arts in Sculptural Design from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. He had been featured in 3 legitimate gallery shows downtown, specializing in found object brutalist sculpture. He was literally exactly what I needed. A guy who knew how to use a hammer drill, but also knew how to write a pretentious artist statement. I found his phone number on the decking website and called him. Evans Custom, a gruff voice answered. It sounded like a guy who smoked a pack of Marlboro Reds for breakfast. Hey, Mike. My name is David. I have a project for you. Yeah? What are we talking? Composite deck? You need a privacy fence? Honestly, I'm booked out until next month for big pours, but I might be able to squeeze in a small job. It's not a deck, I said, leaning forward in my chair. It's an art installation, a permanent site-specific art installation attached to the front of my house. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Buddy, I build decks. If you want a pergola, I'm your guy. I don't do the art stuff for clients. That's my personal work. I know, I said quickly. I saw your portfolio, the gallery shows in River North, the found object pieces. It's brilliant stuff, Mike. And I need a recognized artist for this. I will pay your full contractor day rate, plus an artistic commission fee. And I'm covering all materials. Another long pause. I could hear him chewing something. Probably tobacco. Or maybe just a really tough piece of beef jerky. All right, Mike finally grunted. What's the medium? Footwear, I said. Specifically, neon foam clogs, 50 pairs, drilled directly into my vinyl siding. Mike let out a sound that was half cough, half laugh. You're messing with me, right? You want me to screw Crocs to your house? I am dead serious, Mike. I need it done this weekend. And I need you to draft a formal certificate of authenticity stating it is a permanent work of art. Where do you live? Whispering Pines, over off Route 59. An HOA neighborhood? Mike's voice shifted. There was a sudden spark of amusement in it. Let me guess. The board pissed you off? The president stole my hiking boots. I'll be there tomorrow at 9 a.m. to look at the canvas, Mike said, and hung up. The next morning, Mike rolled up my driveway in a battered Ford F-150 that had definitely seen better days. He stepped out of the truck, and he was quite literally the most intimidating person I had ever seen in this neighborhood. He was maybe 6'2", built like a brick outhouse, wearing a stained Carhartt jacket, steel-toe boots, and he was absolutely covered in tattoos, like neck tattoos, hand tattoos, the works. He walked up my driveway, his eyes scanning the aggressive beige perfection of my house and the identical houses surrounding it. "Mike?" I asked, stepping out onto the porch. "David," he nodded, walking right past me to inspect the front wall of my house. He tapped the vinyl siding with a calloused knuckle. "Standard hollow vinyl over plywood sheathing. If we just run screws into it, it's gonna crack the vinyl and cause water damage. We gotta do this right. We need rubber gaskets behind the screws to weather seal the penetrations." "So, you can do it?" Mike turned to look at me, pulling a piece of gum out of his pocket and popping it into his mouth. "Oh, I can do it. The structural integrity of the installation won't be compromised. But we need to talk about the artistic vision, David. Because if my name is going on this as the creator, it can't just look like a shoe store exploded. It needs intent." I was honestly impressed. "What are you thinking?" "The Crocs are a symbol," Mike said, his voice dropping into this weirdly academic, smooth cadence that totally contrasted with his appearance. "They represent the artificiality of suburban life. A synthetic, mass-produced comfort that ultimately isolates us from the natural world. Your hiking boots, the ones that were stolen, represented dirt, nature, reality. By covering your home in the synthetic, we are creating a dialogue about the sterilization of the modern American neighborhood." I just stared at him for a second. "Mike, that is literally the most beautiful thing I have ever heard." "I know," he said, deadpan. "I've written a lot of artist statements. So how many pairs did you say we are working with?" 50. Mike nodded slowly. "We're gonna need a Fibonacci, spiral layout. It'll draw the eye naturally and create a sense of chaotic order. Have you bought them yet?" "Not yet." "Good. Let's go. We're taking my truck." The trip to the shoe outlet was an experience I will literally never forget. We walked into a massive discount shoe warehouse, and I grabbed 3 of those giant mesh shopping bags they give you. We marched straight to the clearance section in the back, where the off-brand foam clogs lived. "We need high contrast," Mike ordered, tossing pairs into my bag. "Grab the lime greens, grab the electric pinks. No muted colors. No black, no gray. We want this to be visible from the International Space Station." We emptied the entire display. People were staring. I mean, it looked like we were preparing to supply a very brightly colored, very uncomfortable cult. When we got to the register, we dumped a literal mountain of rubber footwear onto the counter. The cashier, a high school kid who looked like he was regretting every life choice that led him to this shift, just stared at the pile. Did a clown car crash?" the kid asked. "We are local artists," Mike said, maintaining eye contact with the kid while pulling out his wallet. "This is our medium." The kid didn't ask any more questions. It rang up to a little over $400, money well spent. We drove back to my house, unloaded the cargo into my garage, and got to work. Mike was an absolute professional. He set up a laser level on a tripod in my front yard, mapping out the precise mathematical spiral he had designed. He marked the siding with a grease pencil. "All right, hand me the drill," Mike said, stepping up onto a step stool. "And a pink one, size 9. I handed him the neon pink shoe. He grabbed a massive galvanized screw, slipped a rubber weather-sealing washer over the thread, positioned the screw right through the center of the Crocs' heel, and hit the drill trigger. Sst. The screw bit into the siding, securing the bright pink shoe flat against the beige wall. It was glorious. "One down," Mike grunted. 99 individual shoes to go. Grab me a green one. We need to establish the color pattern early. We spent the next 6 hours working in tandem. It was actually a lot of fun. I was on supply duty, sorting the colors and handing them up, while Mike handled the actual installation, making sure every single shoe was perfectly aligned within his chaotic spiral design. We drank cheap beer. We talked about the pretentious nature of modern art critics. We talked about how much we both hated Brenda. About halfway through, my next-door neighbor, a quiet guy named Tom, who usually avoided eye contact at all costs, came outside to water his lawn. He stopped mid-hose spray, staring slack-jawed at my house. At this point, there were about 25 pairs of blindingly bright foam shoes screwed to the front wall. "Hey, Tom!" I yelled over the noise of the drill. Tom slowly lowered his hose. "David, what is happening?" "Art, Tom!" Mike yelled down from his ladder, waving a drill in one hand and a bright orange shoe in the other. "It's a commentary on the duality of the suburban condition." Tom just nodded slowly, his eyes wide. "Right. Okay. Good luck with the commentary." He practically ran back inside his house. By sunset, it was finished. Mike stepped down from the ladder, wiped the sweat off his forehead with the back of his dirty sleeve, and walked out to the edge of my driveway to admire the work. I walked out and stood next to him. I literally lost my breath for a second. It was hideous. It was the most visually offensive thing I had ever seen in my entire life. The beige wall of my cookie-cutter suburban home was completely engulfed by a swirling, chaotic vortex of neon plastic. The shoes seemed to vibrate in the fading light. It looked like a portal to a dimension made entirely of bad fashion choices. "It's breathtaking," I whispered. "It really is," Mike agreed, crossing his arms. The juxtaposition of the aggressive neon against the passive-aggressive beige. It invokes a visceral reaction of disgust and intrigue. We're going to call it the duality of souls. "Perfect," I turned to him. "You have the paperwork?" Mike reached into his truck cab and pulled out a clipboard. He handed me a crisp, neatly typed document. It was a formal certificate of authenticity and transfer of title. It explicitly named the installation, identified Michael Evans as the sole artist and copyright holder, and invoked the Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990, explicitly stating that the work was permanently installed and could not be altered, moved, or destroyed without his written consent. "I've already filed a copy with my attorney in the city," Mike said, packing up his drill. "If anyone touches so much as a single rubber strap on those shoes, they are dealing with federal court." I handed him an envelope with his payment. "Mike, you are a genius. Thank you." "Hey," he said, taking the envelope. "Brenda stole your boots. Nobody messes with a man's boots. You let me know when the fireworks start." He drove off into the sunset, leaving me alone with my masterpiece. I sat on a lawn chair in my driveway, cracking open one last beer, and stared at the wall of Crocs. Tomorrow was Monday. Tomorrow, the HOA board did their weekly neighborhood patrol. Tomorrow, Brenda was going to drive her pristine white Lexus SUV right past my house. Honestly, I couldn't wait to see her face. I went to bed that night sleeping like a baby, knowing that I had laid the most legally explosive trap in the history of Naperville. Honestly, waking up that Monday morning felt like waking up on Christmas, if Christmas involved a legal trap and a middle-aged woman having a complete psychological meltdown on my front lawn. I mean, I literally sprang out of bed at 7 a.m. I didn't even hit snooze. I was buzzing. I went downstairs, brewed a pot of the good, expensive coffee I usually save for weekends, and poured it into my favorite mug. Then, I pulled a stool right up to the front window in my living room, cracked the blinds open about 2 inches, and just waited. It was like I was in a duck blind, hunting for the most annoying HOA president in the Midwest. The Whispering Pines Premium Estates neighborhood has a very specific, rhythm to its mornings. At 7:15, the automated sprinklers all kick on in perfect, creepy unison. At 7:30, the aggressive power walkers in their matching Lululemon sets go marching past. But at exactly 8:15 a.m. every single Monday, Brenda begins her beautification patrol. She drives a pristine, pearl-white Lexus SUV. Of course she does. And she drives it at exactly 11 miles per hour, which is somehow 4 miles under the neighborhood speed limit, just so she can slowly scan every single driveway for infractions. A garbage can left out past 8 a.m. Citation. A lawn that looks like it hasn't been edged with military precision? Citation. I checked my watch. 8:10 a.m. I took a sip of my coffee. My heart was actually pounding. I guess I was a little nervous, but mostly I was just vibrating with excitement. At 8:13 a.m., I saw it. The gleaming white grille of the Lexus turned onto my cul-de-sac. She was creeping along the opposite side of the street first. I watched her slow down in front of Tom's house, probably writing down some notes about a single dandelion near his mailbox. Then, the Lexus slowly made its way around the loop. She was approaching my property line. I literally stopped breathing. The SUV rolled into view of my front yard. For a second, nothing happened. The car just kept rolling at its agonizingly slow pace, and then the brake lights engaged. They didn't just illuminate. The nose of the Lexus physically dipped as she slammed on the brakes so hard I could faintly hear the tires squeak through my double-paned glass. The car sat there in the middle of the street, just idling, for 10 seconds, 20 seconds. I honestly thought she might have had a stroke. I mean, it was entirely possible that her brain had simply short-circuited trying to process the visual information of 50 pairs of neon Crocs arranged in a perfect Fibonacci spiral on my beige vinyl siding. Then, the driver's side door flew open. Brenda stepped out into the street. She was wearing a tailored pink blazer and holding a clipboard that looked like it was permanently fused to her hand. She took 3 steps toward my lawn and just froze. Her jaw actually dropped. I mean, people say their jaw dropped as an expression, but her mouth literally hung open like a cartoon character. Her eyes darted wildly over the chaotic, blindingly bright vortex of rubber footwear. The morning sun was hitting the electric green and hot pink shoes, making them glow with an almost radioactive intensity. I couldn't help it. I started laughing so hard I spilled coffee on my hand. I set the mug down, took a deep breath to compose myself, unlocked the front door, and stepped out onto the porch. "Good morning, Brenda," I called out, waving cheerfully. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Her head snapped toward me so fast I thought she might get whiplash. Her face was transitioning through a bizarre spectrum of colors, from pale shock to a deep, blotchy, furious crimson. "David," she gasped, her voice actually trembling. "What? What have you done to your house? What is this abomination?" I leaned casually against the porch railing. Oh, you mean the installation. I'm honestly so glad you noticed. It's a new piece of contemporary art. It really pops, doesn't it? Art? She shrieked. The tremble in her voice was gone, completely replaced by pure, unadulterated HOA rage. She marched up my driveway, her sensible heels clicking aggressively against the concrete. This is not art. This is garbage. You have screwed literal garbage to the side of a property in a premium community. Are you insane? It's actually called the duality of souls, I said, using the pretentious, smooth cadence Mike had used yesterday. It's a commentary on the artificiality of suburban life. A juxtaposition of synthetic, mass-produced comfort against the sterilization of the modern American neighborhood. I commissioned it. I don't care what you call it, Brenda screamed, pointing a trembling finger at a safety orange clog near the center of the spiral. It is a flagrant, malicious violation of Bylaw 4A. It is visual blight. It is an unauthorized exterior modification. You are going to take every single one of those clown shoes down right this second, or I will fine you $1,000 a day. I literally can't take it down, Brenda, I said, putting a hand on my chest in mock innocence. I mean, I really wish I could help you out, but my hands are legally tied. Legally tied? She let out a laugh that sounded like a screeching owl. I am the law in this neighborhood, David. You have 24 hours to remove this trash, or the HOA will hire a crew to rip them off your house, and we will bill you for the labor. Do you understand me? I highly advise against that, I warned, keeping my voice completely calm and level. Like, seriously, Brenda, do not send a crew to touch my house. Watch me, she snapped. She aggressively clicked her pen, flipped to a fresh page on her clipboard, and started furiously writing. You are in so much trouble. I'm calling the property management company. I'm calling the landscaping crew. And you know what? I'm calling the police. This is vandalism. By all means, I gestured toward the street. Call the police. I honestly think that's a great idea. She glared at me, whipped out her phone, and dialed 911. While she was yelling at the dispatcher, claiming that a lunatic was destroying the neighborhood's aesthetic integrity, a crowd started to gather. I mean, my house was basically a glowing beacon of insanity, so it didn't take long. My neighbor Tom peeked his head out of his front door again, holding a mug of tea, watching the spectacle with wide eyes. A couple of dog walkers stopped at the end of the cul-de-sac, whispering and pointing at the Croc wall. I just went back inside, grabbed a lawn chair, brought it out to the driveway, and sat down. I literally had all day. About 15 minutes later, a Naperville police cruiser turned the corner. I honestly started praying to whatever forces govern the universe that it would be Officer Martinez again. And, as the car pulled up behind Brenda's Lexus and the door opened, my prayers were answered. Martinez stepped out. He looked exactly as exhausted as he had 3 days ago, maybe even more so. He walked up to where Brenda was standing at the edge of my lawn. All right, ma'am. What seems to be the... Martinez stopped mid-sentence. He slowly turned his head to look at my house. He stopped walking. He just stood there in the driveway, staring at the 15-foot-wide mosaic of neon rubber shoes bolted to my vinyl siding. He slowly reached up, took off his mirrored sunglasses, and rubbed his eyes. He let out a sigh that was so deep and profound it practically deflated his entire posture. "Officer!" Brenda pounced, waving her clipboard at him. "Thank God you're here! Look at this! This man has lost his mind. He has vandalized his own home to spite the community. I demand you arrest him or force him to take this hazard down immediately!" Martinez slowly walked up the driveway toward me. I was still sitting in my lawn chair, smiling. "David," Martinez said, his voice flat. "Officer Martinez?" I replied. "Welcome back." "David, what am I looking at right now?" "You are looking at a federally protected, site-specific art installation, officer." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the manila envelope containing the paperwork Mike had given me. I stood up and handed it to him. "Federal?" Brenda scoffed, crossing her arms. "Don't listen to him, officer. It's a bunch of cheap shoes from a strip mall. He's doing this because I cited him for leaving dirty boots on his porch." "Wait, you're the boot lady?" Martinez asked, glancing at Brenda. "I am the president of the Homeowners Association," she corrected haughtily. Martinez opened the envelope and pulled out the certificate of authenticity. He started reading. I watched his eyes scan the legal jargon. I watched as he read the words Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990. I watched as his eyebrows slowly crept up his forehead. "It's all in there, Martinez," I said, walking over and pointing to the second paragraph. "VARA, Title 17, U.S. Code, Section 106A. This installation was created by Michael Evans, a recognized sculptural artist with a documented exhibition history in Chicago galleries. He retains the moral rights to this piece. It is permanently integrated into the structure. Under federal copyright law, it cannot be destroyed, modified, or removed without his explicit, written consent." "That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard," Brenda yelled. "HOA covenants supersede any nonsense excuse he makes up. It's in the contract he signed when he bought the house." "Actually, Brenda, they don't," I turned to her, dropping the casual tone and hitting her with the legal reality. "Federal law supersedes state law, municipal law, and it absolutely crushes your little neighborhood book club rules. This isn't an exterior modification, it's copyrighted art. If you send a crew to take it down, you are authorizing the destruction of federally protected work." Martinez finished reading the document. He flipped to the back page, saw the artist's portfolio attachments, and then handed the stack of papers back to me. He looked at me. Then he looked at the wall of Crocs. Then he looked at Brenda. A tiny, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at the corner of Martinez's mouth. It was the look of a man who dealt with Brenda types all day, every day, and was finally watching one step on a massive neon-pink landmine. "Ma'am," Martinez said, putting his sunglasses back on. "He's got a certificate of authenticity invoking a federal copyright statute. This isn't vandalism. He owns the house, and he commissioned an artist." "But bylaw 4 I don't enforce HOA bylaws, Brenda," Martinez cut her off, using her first name, which clearly enraged her further. "I enforce the law, and right now there is no law being broken here. In fact, if you try to forcefully remove those items, he could probably have you federally charged." "This is unacceptable!" she shrieked, stomping her foot like an actual toddler. "I am calling the HOA attorneys. We will sue you into the ground, David. We will place a lien on this house by the end of the week. You haven't heard the last of this." "I look forward to hearing from them, Brenda," I said politely. "Just make sure they bill you for the hours and not the neighborhood reserve fund." Brenda let out a sound of pure frustration, spun around, marched back to her Lexus, and slammed the door so hard I thought the window might shatter. She peeled out of the cul-de-sac, breaking the speed limit for the first time in her life. Martinez watched her go. He turned back to me, shook his head, and chuckled. "You know," Martinez said, gesturing to the wall, "I'm more of a Nike guy myself, but I gotta admit, the spiral design, it's growing on me. Have a nice day, David." "You too, officer." As Martinez drove away, the neighbors who had gathered started to slowly disperse. Tom gave me a subtle thumbs up from across the lawn before disappearing back into his house. I walked back inside, grabbed my cold cup of coffee, and poured it down the sink. Round 1 was a flawless victory, but I knew Brenda wasn't going to give up that easily. She was an HOA president. Surrender wasn't in her vocabulary. She was going to drag me in front of the board. She was going to bring the lawyers. I spent the next 3 days preparing for the inevitable. I didn't just rely on Mike's paperwork. I wanted to build a fortress of malicious compliance. I reached out to a copyright attorney in the city, a guy named Robert, who specialized in intellectual property and had actually litigated a VARA case before. I paid Robert a $300 consultation fee to review the setup. We did a Zoom call. I pointed my laptop camera out the front window so he could see the installation. Robert, a guy in his 50s wearing a very expensive suit, stared at his screen for a long time. "David," Robert finally said, "that is profoundly ugly." "Thank you," I said. "But is it legally airtight?" "VARA is a very tricky statute," Robert explained, adjusting his glasses. "The key phrase is recognized stature. The courts have ruled that it's a two-tiered test. First, the art must have merit. Second, that merit must be recognized by art experts, the art community, or society. The fact that your contractor actually has an MFA and a gallery history is the linchpin here. If he was just a guy with a hammer, you'd lose. But because he has established himself as a found object sculptor, yes, you have a very strong case. The sheer absurdity of the medium actually plays into the contemporary art defense. So if they tear it down? Under VARA, statutory damages can range from $750 to $30,000 per work, Robert said, leaning into his webcam. And if the destruction is proven to be willful, which it would be if you formally notify them of its protected status beforehand, the damages can jump to $150,000, plus attorney's fees. Perfect, I smiled. I need you to draft a formal cease and desist letter addressed to the Whispering Pines Premium Estates Board of Directors. I want it on your firm's heavy, expensive letterhead, and I need it by Thursday. Thursday evening was the emergency board meeting. Brenda hadn't just called a regular meeting. She had distributed flyers to every house in the neighborhood, calling it a crisis response forum regarding the visual degradation of Lot 42. She was rallying the troops. She wanted a public execution. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a depressing building that smelled like chlorine and stale coffee. When I walked in at 6:55 p.m., the room was packed. There were at least 50 residents sitting in folding chairs, muttering to each other. At the front of the room, sitting behind a folding table like a tribunal, was the HOA board. Brenda sat in the center, flanked by the treasurer and the secretary. And sitting next to Brenda was a guy in a cheap gray suit, the HOA's retained lawyer. I walked down the center aisle and took a seat in the very front row. I crossed my legs, placed my manila folder on my lap, and gave Brenda a polite, tight-lipped smile. She glared at me, picked up a wooden gavel, and slammed it against the table. "I call this emergency session to order," Brenda announced into a terrible, echoing microphone. "We are here to address the unprecedented, malicious, and frankly disgusting violation of community standards currently affixed to the exterior of David's property on Elmwood Court." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Some of the older residents nodded sternly. "I have consulted with our legal counsel, Mr. Peterson." Brenda gestured to the guy in the gray suit. "And the board has drafted a formal resolution. David, you are hereby ordered to remove the unauthorized refuse from your siding within 48 hours. Failure to comply will result in the HOA authorizing a third-party contractor to remove the items, the cost of which, plus a $5,000 punitive fine for gross bylaw violations, will be assessed as a lien against your property." She slammed the gavel down again. "Resolution passed." The crowd actually clapped. She looked so smug. She thought she had won. She thought the presence of a lawyer in a gray suit would intimidate me into taking down my beautiful neon masterpiece. I slowly stood up. The room went quiet. "I appreciate the board's efficiency," I said, my voice carrying across the silent clubhouse. "But honestly, I think Mr. Peterson needs to review some additional documentation before you send anyone to touch my house." I walked up to the folding table. I didn't look at Brenda. I looked directly at the lawyer. I slid the thick, expensive-feeling envelope across the table until it rested right in front of him. "What is this?" Peterson asked, frowning. "That is a formal cease and desist order," I said clearly, making sure the microphone picked up my voice. "Drafted by my retained intellectual property counsel in Chicago, and attached to it is the Artist's Certificate of Authenticity, the VARA registration paperwork, and the legal precedent proving that my property currently houses a federally protected work of contemporary art." Peterson's frown deepened. He opened the envelope and pulled out the letterhead from Robert's fancy downtown firm. Brenda scoffed into the microphone. "Don't bother reading it, Mr. Peterson. It's just more of his sovereign citizen nonsense. He thinks gluing Crocs to his house is art." "It's not glued, Brenda. It's properly secured with weather-sealed masonry screws," I corrected, looking back at the lawyer. "Mr. Peterson, I assume you are familiar with Title 17 of the United States Code?" Peterson didn't answer. His eyes were scanning the cease and desist letter. As he read, I watched the color slowly drain out of his face. He flipped to the second page. He read the case law citations. He read the penalty clauses. He started to sweat. I mean, visibly. A bead of sweat actually formed on his temple. "Mr. Peterson?" Brenda prompted, annoyed by his silence. "Tell him the lien is binding." Peterson slowly lowered the papers. He looked at me, and I could see the panic in his eyes. He realized exactly what kind of trap they had walked into. He knew that HOA covenants were essentially private contracts, and private contracts do not override federal statutes regarding intellectual property and moral rights. He leaned over to Brenda. He didn't use the microphone. He whispered frantically in her ear. "Brenda, we have a problem," Peterson muttered. But the room was so quiet that the front row could definitely hear him. "What problem?" she hissed back. "It's a bylaw violation." It's not a bylaw violation anymore," Peterson whispered, pulling at his collar. "He's invoked the Visual Artists' Rights Act. He hired a legitimate, credentialed artist to install this. If we send a crew to take down those shoes, we are committing a willful violation of federal copyright law." "So, let him sue us," Brenda argued, completely oblivious to the scale of the danger. "We have a legal defense fund." "Brenda, listen to me," Peterson said, his voice rising in panic. "The statutory damages for destroying a VARA-protected work can be up to $150,000, and that is per infringement." "What does that mean?" she demanded. Peterson looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. "It means, depending on how a federal judge interprets the installation, the damages might not be for the whole wall. It might be for each individual shoe. If we tear down 50 pairs of shoes, the liability could theoretically be in the millions. It would instantly bankrupt the entire HOA reserve fund. We'd have to specially assess every single homeowner in this neighborhood for tens of thousands of dollars just to pay the judgment." The clubhouse went dead silent. You could literally hear a pin drop. Every single resident in the room, the ones who had just been clapping for my execution, suddenly froze. They did the math in their heads. They realized that Brenda's vendetta against my boots was about to cost them their savings. That's impossible, Brenda gasped, her voice shrill and desperate. They are Crocs! They are hideous plastic shoes! They are not art! I leaned forward, resting my hands on the folding table, looking her dead in the eye. It's avant-garde, Brenda, I said softly, the smugness practically dripping from my words. You just lack the cultural refinement to appreciate it. I tapped the manila folder. If anyone from the board, or any contractor hired by the board, sets foot on my property and touches my house, my lawyer files the federal injunction the very next morning. The choice is yours. You can learn to love the neon, or you can bankrupt the neighborhood. I turned around and walked out of the clubhouse. I didn't wait to be dismissed. I didn't wait to hear the fallout. As the heavy doors swung shut behind me, I could hear the absolute chaos erupting inside. The residents were shouting. Brenda was shrieking into the microphone. Peterson was trying to calm everyone down. It was the sound of a dictatorship collapsing under the weight of its own petty rules. The aftermath of the clubhouse showdown was honestly the most peaceful month of my life in Whispering Pines. The HOA board immediately rescinded the order to remove the installation. They essentially sent me a highly sanitized, legally mandated email stating that Lot 42 is granted a temporary aesthetic variance pending further review, which was just lawyer speak for please don't sue us into oblivion. The Croc wall stayed up. In fact, it became something of a weird, local legend. Teenagers from the local high school started driving over on weekends just to take selfies in front of it. It even made the back page of the local Naperville community paper under the headline, Suburban Art or Eyesore? The Duality of Souls Sparks Debate. As for Brenda, the neighborhood absolutely turned on her. Once the residents realized her aggressive micromanagement almost cost them a massive federal lawsuit, the support for her draconian rule evaporated. At the next standard board meeting, a group of homeowners called for a vote of no confidence. Brenda, unable to handle the public humiliation and the daily blinding view of neon plastic every time she drove past my street, abruptly resigned as HOA president. She put her house on the market 3 weeks later. I watched the moving trucks load up her pristine white furniture. I like to think that as she drove out of the cul-de-sac for the last time, the sun caught the safety orange Crocs just right, burning the image into her retinas forever. I eventually took the installation down, of course. About 6 months after Brenda moved out, the new HOA board approached me with a peace offering. They formally amended Bylaw 4A to allow temporary placement of functional outdoor footwear on front porches, and in exchange, I had Mike come back and officially decommission the artwork. I paid Mike another day rate to unscrew the shoes. We patched the holes, power washed the siding, and it looked like nothing had ever happened. But I kept one pair of the neon pink Crocs. I keep them on a shelf in my garage, right next to my perfectly broken-in, muddy brown Timberland boots. So, honestly, what did we learn today, sovereign rulers? If someone tries to step on your toes over a pair of dirty boots, you don't just argue with them. You don't try to reason with crazy. You find the rulebook they don't know exists. You buy 50 pairs of the ugliest shoes legally available for purchase, and you nail them to the wall until the opposition simply packs up and leaves town. Stay sovereign, my friends.